The session will begin with my brief introduction, after which Naomi Wolf will speak to all of you for about 25 to 30 minutes, after which she also, and I'm sure all of you, will want to ask questions, which she will answer. A culture fixated on female thinness is not a culture obsessed about female beauty, but on female obedience. Dieting is the most potent sedative in women's history. A quietly mad population is also a tractable one. A quote from the beauty myth. Naomi Wolf, perhaps one of the most outspoken, quoted, misquoted, passionate, imitated, cited, adored, and criticized feminists of her generation, has taken an intimate and wise look at many issues that have affected and infected the women of our times. Beauty, conception, pregnancy, motherhood, sexual desire, power, success, politics, and money. Not much has escaped her uncompromising and hard-hitting investigative eye. Each of her books, Promiscuities, Misconceptions, Fire with Fire, The Beauty Myth, have sought to shatter the false polarities that have swaddled the women of our generation with layers of illusion, lies, and falsehoods. Author, social critic, and political activist, Naomi Wolf raises questions about the essential and glaring inequities that exist in our society, particularly against women. Evaluating popular culture, mythology, scientific research, and history that have created the current definitions of womanhood and female sexuality, Naomi Wolf's voice is a literate, passionate, and rambunctious call to arms, a tonic to the feminist soul. Besides her best-selling books that began with a cult smash hit, The Beauty Myth, in 1991, Wolf has written about the erosion of human rights in The End of America, a letter of warning to a young patriot, and Give Me Liberty, a handbook for American revolutionaries, which includes tips for citizens to promote civic engagement and create a sustainable democracy. Subjects like abortion, pornography, sexual harassment, women in Islamic countries, and current political issues also fall under her radar for comment and closer examination. She's a frequent blogger for the Huffington Post and writes cultural commentary for the Washington Post, The Guardian, and Harper's Bazaar. A graduate at Yale and a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, Wolf was a consultant to the presidential campaign of Al Gore on women's issues and social policy. She's also the co-founder of the Woodhull Institute of Ethical Leadership for Young Women. An in-demand speaker across the world and no stranger to controversy, Naomi Wolf's latest book, Vagina, a New Biography, has already created a storm with readers and special interest groups. It is a searing and fascinating look at the complex wild life that is female sexuality and desire. The book blasts wide open and whispers behind the V word and makes connections between the brain, neuroscience, and the geography of that part of the female anatomy that has become like an abyss of darkness and shame and the focus of a silent and deadly attack through centuries. In a country like India that has typically adopted a hypocritical and duplicitous approach to women, at once deifying and defiling them, holding up goddess tropes like Kali and Lakshmi as destroyer and nurturer, a predominantly patriarchal Indian society is grappling with the rising power of women in all spheres of life. Against the global horror of a Nirbhaya, we also have the stunning peaceful resistance model of Irom Sharmila of Manipur, who has been lauded internationally and lambasted by incumbent governments for a 14-year-long fast against the violence of the Indian army. And on this, the last day of the sacred month of Margari for many, we have the recurring reminder that Indian women saints like Andal and Meera have found spirituality and celibacy as a quiet and effective inner faith to resist the patriarchy, discrimination, and unequal opportunities of their times. In a gathering like today, where several successful women are often accused of being elitist, dilettante urban feminists, out of touch with the ground reality of our sisters, fighting for the very basics of survival and existence, where grinding poverty, rape, dowry deaths, and female infanticide are still occurring, perhaps Naomi Wolf's direct experience half a world away may not seem relevant to us in India. But as she said on this very platform 2 days ago, the study model she adopted over 20 years ago for researching the beauty myth has now traveled globally. India and Asia are now reeling under very similar tyrannical visual role models of impossible beauty. Every day, she observes, women in India and Asia are doing feminism, even without being unaware of being feminist. For Wolf in 2009, in love and sexually satisfied, she experienced sex as, quote, a poetic dimension. And then came the rupture, the disappearance of that sensation, and the genesis of this latest book. In a city that prides itself on intellectual intelligence, where long-held social mores are changing at a bewildering speed, and whose audiences were prevented from watching a staging of Eve Ensler's The Vagina monologues a few years ago by the moral police, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you, delivering her talk, Beyond the Vagina, Naomi Wolf.
Thank you so much, Anita, for that generous and thoughtful introduction. And thank you to this audience. I have so many people to thank already. It's been life-changing for me already to be part of this dialogue, and I'm honored to have been invited to speak with you and learn from you. And I really want to especially thank the Hindu and my new friends and colleagues at the Hindu who have made this discussion possible and who have welcomed me so warmly to Chennai. So thank you. I hope it's, the beginning of many, many global conversations among us. I've learned so much. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. And forgive my voice, it's a little hoarse. What I thought I would do is, because there's so much to learn, from one another about this subject. 2 days ago, we had a conversation in this space, and it was very valuable for me because obviously I'm coming from another place, and it's very important for me to understand what are the issues that the women and men here in Chennai feel are the most important in terms of these themes of gender and sexuality, and what's especially urgent. And some of those themes really surfaced when we last spoke. Some of these issues are universal and some are very, very culturally specific, and so it's very important for me to hear and learn, especially in the Q&A. So what I'm going to do is, for about half an hour, summarize the themes in my book, and then what I'd like to do is, as you mentioned, Anita, open it up to conversation, and I'd like to maybe change the format a little bit. I would welcome comments. I don't think I have by any means all of the answers, and I would like to learn from you what's important to you with this discussion. So I'm a pacer, and so I just want to kind of share from my heart, what went into writing this book. As Anita said, as she referenced, the shape of this book did come from a personal experience that I had a couple of years ago. As a feminist, I always knew that someday I would have to write a book about the vagina. Why is that? Because it's like Voldemort, that which cannot be named, right? I mean, it's, right? Actually, someone said yesterday, wow, I can't believe that here in this auditorium in Chennai, we were saying clitoris, labia, all of these things. And there is something very important, I think, as a writer about kind of naming the names that are not supposed to be named. I mean, it's something I learned from the gay and lesbian movement, that sometimes silence is the worst oppressor. Anyway, why did I always know I would have to write a book about the vagina? Because you can't help noticing, looking at women's history, that in culture after culture, century after century, female desire, female sexual self-knowledge is targeted, mocked, ridiculed, debased, in some cultures mutilated, excised, right? And this is almost universal. So often the direction of that targeting is the vagina. And when I use the term vagina, I'm actually using it inaccurately, medically, because our language is so impoverished. And I was just told that even in Hindi, our language is impoverished, that there aren't good or enough words, and I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding. Of course, I don't know about Tamil and Urdu. I'll learn in the Q&A, but I know in English, vagina literally means that the introitus, the space inside your body, but actually the female sexual nexus, comprises, and when I say vagina, I mean all of this, the clitoris, the labia, inner labia, outer labia, perineum, introitus, mouth of the cervix, and so on. So please know that that's what I mean. But I knew that I would have to write about why it is this third rail of silence and shame. But then I had a very remarkable personal experience that framed my neuroscientific investigation in the book, which went like this. And this is very embarrassing to talk about in a whole new culture, on a whole new continent, and I'm blushing, but you're my new best friends, so I'll just plunge ahead. Thank you. So I did, in fact, notice a few years ago that I was losing sexual sensation. Very alarming, no one would like that. But even more disturbingly, I noticed that I was losing states of mind, mood states that I'd come to associate with how I felt after sexual pleasure. And that this was resulting in what neuroscientists call anhedonia, which means being unable to find pleasure in anything. So the world increasingly looked kind of meaningless and drained of color and flat. And I literally thought, I can't live the rest of my life like this. So thank God I had really unusually skilled doctors in New York who happened to be specialists. And it turned out I was born with a variant of spina bifida. And I'd had a back injury that was damaging the neural connection between my brain and my sexual response. And so when that was fixed, which it was through surgery, to my astonishment, not only did my sexual sensation come back, I can't believe I'm saying this in front of a bunch of nice people in a whole new place, but, and that's happy, right, very happy. But to my amazement, all of these mind states returned as well. I saw connections between things. I saw meaning in the world. It was almost like this, like, you know, I saw the sublime, you know, that sense of things being important returned. Things didn't seem flat. So with this experience, I realized that I had witnessed something extraordinary by accident, and that I needed to understand what these connections were. It was clearly neurobiological. So that took me on a journey which I report on in Vagina, the book, in which I discovered that the last 15 or 20 years have introduced absolutely mind-blowing, extraordinary new scientific information about female sexuality that should completely reframe everything we know, because the received wisdom we have about female sexuality is wrong. And it's wrong in ways that are not making women happy. And I'll get to the specifics. But that some of the most extraordinary findings of the last 10 or 15 years have to do with this brain-vagina connection, this neurobiological connection between what happens to the woman's body sexually and what happens in her mind. And by the way, I just want to stress, I'm not reducing women to their sexual responses in reporting on this information. You could write a similar book about the relationship between male confidence and sense of self and male sexual response. There's plenty of data about that. No one would say, oh, you're reducing men to their sexual organs if you were to write that book, or I hope not. It did, seeing the science did illuminate for me so many mysteries about the female condition and about women's history, why the vagina has been targeted. So let me tell you first what's wrong with this terrible situation in which what we know about female sexuality is 30 years out of date and inaccurate. We've had a sexual revolution, and I know that, again, this is culturally specific, that the sexual revolution is taking very unique forms here in India and in this part of the world, just like it takes different forms all over the world. But it's happening, right? And the information that a young woman at college here has access to is the same information my daughter has access to if she is looking. But that information is terrible. 30% of women, 30 or 40 years after the quote-unquote sexual revolution that unleashed pornography readily available, in some cultures 24/7, and that created an abundance of sexual discourse, at least in the West, hasn't improved women's sexual satisfaction. It would be very interesting to look at the numbers here. I just spoke to a sex educator working here in Chennai, and we can speak with her in the Q&A. But the numbers pretty much culture by culture that I've looked at are pretty standard. They're bad. 30% of women do not reach orgasm regularly when they want to. Another 30%, some the same women and some different women, have low libido. They're not interested. They've given up because it's not rewarding. And women are the major initiators of divorce. So this is worth paying attention to. It turns out that female sexuality doesn't take a lot of bad experiences before the body switches off. It has that memory. It's even true in lower mammals, but we'll get to that. And that women are, really reporting that they're not having the kind of connection that they want to, the kind of pleasure that they want to. So what went wrong? What went wrong is that when we talk about female sexuality, we're still using a model that's Masters and Johnson, which is from the early 70s. And as you'll hear, it's completely not accurate. And I'll tell you what some of the new data show that is so revolutionary. So the number one kind of headline to me about the new data is that pleasure empowers women, psychologically, intellectually, politically, I would argue, because of something really interesting that happens in the female brain neurobiologically when women are allowed to know about their pleasure and how to have access to it. Here's what I mean. If a woman lives in a culture that supports her knowing how to have an orgasm, okay, let's just put it out there, and knowing her own body and her own sexual responses and not feeling shame and guilt about that, which is a theme that has been coming up a lot, since I've been here. We all have different kinds of guilt and shame in different cultures, and the shame thing is something we can, that I'm hearing about a lot. But say her culture doesn't say these feelings, this desire, this pleasure has to be accompanied by shame. If she's allowed to anticipate sexual pleasure, and if she's in control of her own sexual pleasure, which is where it starts from, right? If you know how to reach orgasm yourself, you can reach orgasm with someone else. Then her brain boosts dopamine in anticipation of this. Now, dopamine is an amazing and I would say political neurotransmitter. Dopamine creates focus, concentration, drive, confidence, assertiveness, risk-taking, appropriate risk-taking, trust in your own judgment, right? You can hear the feminist resonances of this, I'm sure. I mean, how extraordinary. Dopamine makes women harder to subjugate. Dopamine makes women harder to control. Dopamine makes women more difficult to believe that other people know what's best for them. Okay? I call it the ultimate feminist neurotransmitter, kind of jokingly. But not really. If a woman has an orgasm, it boosts opioids in her brain, and these are about transcendence, bliss, that sense of the sublime. That's what what kind of went flat when the connection is severed. And again, I would say that that has a political resonance. If people have access to that state of mind, they can't be, I don't know, I think it's quite a revolutionary thing. They can't be constrained by systems that are imposed on them from without quite as easily. And also, if she's made love to carefully enough, meaning with enough attentiveness, it boosts oxytocin. And oxytocin is also a miracle worker. They're doing new experiments showing that oxytocin makes autistic children better at reading social cues and emotional states. Oxytocin, when you are nursing a baby, oxytocin is what makes you bond with your baby, right? Because the suction on the nipples makes, boosts oxytocin, which makes you then love, cherish, feel connected to the baby. So oxytocin boosts your connection to your partner, and it also makes you better able to see the connections, the meanings between things. So my conclusion is that this is the reason that female sexuality has been targeted and suppressed and ridiculed and mocked and women kept ignorant, because these mood states are so powerful. And if you want to have submissive, zombie-like women, you can't let them find out about their own bodies enough so that they always have these mood states available to them, right? To me, it was an aha moment. I'll get to the dark side of this science later on. The second kind of amazing headline is the difference that scientists have found between male. Are you guys all with me? There's a weird silence in the hall, but I guess you're just thinking. Okay, all right, I'll just keep going. I'll plunge ahead. Oh God, everything's a double entendre. It's terrible. Sorry. You're not allowed to interrupt. Is it okay if I allow them to interrupt when necessary? Or maybe I should just zip through and then we'll have lots of time for Q&A. All right. So male and, Masters and Johnson said women and men are basically similar. Not true. They're totally different. If you look at a Netter image, which is an anatomical image of the male sexual neural wiring, what you see is like a very regular grid of nerves around the penis. So that even though men are all different and their histories are all different, what makes them happy sexually, mechanically, is very similar. And I'm trying to not have like graphic gestures at all here, but it's very straightforward in that regard. It's like, Manhattan is a grid. There's uptown, there's downtown. The streets are laid out like this and like this. You know where you are. You don't get lost. Right? In contrast, if you look at the Netter image of female neural wiring, sexual neural wiring, it is completely different. It's like beautiful tangles of lighting, of these beautiful, I would say Christmas lights, but that's not culturally appropriate, but like beautiful little strings of lights. But there are 8 or 9 of them. There's one we know about at the clitoris. There's one they found at the mouth of the cervix. There are neural termini in the walls of the vagina. Masters and Johnson said there weren't. It's not true. There are neural termini in the perineum, which is often severed with birthing practices, which is why so many women turn off to their partners after having babies. There are neural termini in the, people can speak to me afterwards about where some of these other neural termini are, but they're all over the place. It's like Sao Paulo at Mardi Gras. Totally different, right? But the amazing thing about women and their neural wiring is that every single woman's neural wiring is unique to her. You can applaud that. Totally unique. It's like a signature, right? But what it means is that if you want to make a woman happy, if you want to love a woman, you can't be process-oriented, like, well, the last one liked this, so this one will like that, right? You have to learn every woman as if for the very first time, and she has to learn herself, more importantly, with very great respect and sensitivity. The third thing is also anatomical. Incredible. I can't believe they've just found this out. I can't believe the scientists who discovered it aren't getting a Nobel Prize. But we think about the clitoris, if, as the sex educator in Chennai said, we know where it is, right? As this tiny little thing. And it turns out it isn't. And if we even know about the G-spot, we also think of that as a separate thing. Well, it turns out that the clitoris has been discovered to be much, much more complicated and much bigger a neural structure than anyone knew, and that it wraps around the labia. And not only that, I have to put down, I have to use both hands for this. It actually extends all the way back in the female pelvis such that the north of it is the clitoris and the south of it is the G-spot. It's one neural structure. Why is this so important? You remember, and by the way, this is worth the price of admission. I think this information I've given you, although it's free, isn't it? So, a blessing that the Hindu is bestowing on the people of this community. This is the beauty of a free press. So, what is amazing is that, you remember those numbers of women not reaching orgasm so frequently. In a study in which scientists, strangers in lab conditions, were stimulating both of these points at the same time, over 90% of women reached orgasm every single time. So yes, you can applaud. Applaud. It's good to celebrate knowledge. But I think that that's an extraordinary finding. And it's kind of extraordinary to me that you can even look at the Wikipedia entry on the female genitals, and this new, very important information isn't there, you know, to inform the 16-year-old girl or the 16-year-old boy. And by the way, when I talk about knowledge, I really want to stress that I think that the more knowledge young people have in a context of respect and self-respect, the smarter and more responsible choices they'll make. And I really, like this part of the discussion, I really share as a mother. You know, I have a daughter and a son, and I really feel, in looking at the data on, again, thinking about that sex educator here locally and the struggle she's having even getting good information into the schools, which we can talk about later, struggles that are mirrored in the country that I come from, there is no doubt that kids get into more trouble sexually by not knowing these basics, not having these basics communicated in a context of respect for self and respect for others. That's where the dangers lie. All right. So then I just want to zip ahead. Another amazing finding is the role of the autonomic nervous system in female arousal. What is this? It doesn't sound very sexy. Autonomic nervous system, what's that? No one tells you about it, pardon me, but it's very important to female arousal. It turns out that female orgasm, but arousal and desire, are really dependent on the activation of the autonomic nervous system. What is your autonomic nervous system? Well, you might ask. It's the part of you that makes your heart rate go up. It boosts your blood circulation around your body. When your blood is circulating, your heart is racing, you know, all of those romances where, you know, the lover moves in for the kiss. It sends blood to all parts of your body, making your nipples more sensitive, making your clitoris engorge. This is where I start to talk really fast because, again, I'm embarrassed in public in a new place, but we're here for this. We can do it together. Helps you lubricate, you know, sends blood flow to all of those very important areas that we talked about for women. And it's activation rather than arousal. I'm sorry, it's activation rather than orgasm, which is the really important thing for women. In other words, our whole culture, or at least Western pornographic culture, is very focused on orgasm, right? But that they don't teach boys or men or lovers of women of whatever gender anything about activation. But it turns out, if you ask women, and I'm sure, I'm not going to do a show of hands here because we don't need to be that intimate, but the women in the audience can probably remember the difference in their lives between those times that there was high activation of their autonomic nervous systems in lovemaking versus those times there wasn't. And you can have an orgasm without that heightened activation. I see so many smiles in the audience. It's so sweet. It's like dreamy memories, right? You know, versus the times that there was whatever, but no heightened activation. So autonomic nervous system activation makes so much difference. Now, what shuts down that delicate, complex process immediately? I'm going to throw this out to the audience for women. Stress. You got it in one. Stress. Violence, exactly. So under the headline of stress, we can add violence. What are other forms of stress? Fear. Yes. What else? Telephones. Is that what you, cell phones? Yes, that's right. Yeah, distractions, exactly. Interruptions. What else? What? Lack of intimacy. If that stresses you out, absolutely. Physical incompatibility, that is stressful, yes. How about resentment, anger, you know, feeling unvalued, disrespected, right? These are all great responses. So, in other words, whatever stresses a woman out, if her issue is her partner drops the socks beside the hamper in the morning instead of putting the socks in the hamper, and that happens at 7 a.m., and here she comes home from work and wants to make love at 7 p.m., the woman can't just switch her brain from feeling disrespected in the morning to I'm ready to go. Let's get on that highway, right? She cannot do it. She's not being mean. She's not being withholding. She's not being a B word, which I won't say in public, respecting sensibilities. She's just not able to because her autonomic nervous system cannot get into gear, right? Conversely, it's so interesting. I've got a whole chapter on Tantra because what they were recommending centuries ago turns out to map up against Western neuroscience in some important ways. One of the things they say is, de-stress the environment. Flowers, tell her she's beautiful, make her feel special. And it turns out that dials down the stress, dials up the relaxation response that then allows women, pardon me, to get truly aroused and have that autonomic nervous system reaction. What is the takeaway? It's like so obvious. And by the way, pornography, which is now training our young men and young women in every culture, absolutely teaches them not to have sex in ways that would cultivate the autonomic nervous system response of women. It is like 4 minutes and straight to the, and this is, catastrophic. And in fact, young women in my country and all over the countries I've gone to are saying it's having this effect on sexual skills, basically. But the bottom line is, and again, I think it's a conversation to have with young people, if you want a woman to want to sleep with you for the rest of your life, enthusiastically, you have to be nice to her for the rest of her life. And I mean, to me, that is such a feminist, takeaway. It's such a feminist discovery. All right, the last thing I want to say to you, and then I want to save time for lots of discussion, is I guess I have to talk about rape and the neuroscience of rape. And when I said there's a dark side to this discovery, here's the dark side. And this is especially important. I've been writing in my globally syndicated column about the rape protests in India. And what's going on here is so important and such a model for the rest of the world in terms of the categorical grassroots rejection by so many people, men and women, of rape impunity and harassment impunity. And these issues, not just rape, which is one place on the spectrum, but routine physical invasion, physical harassment of women of all ages in the street and so on. This came up the day before yesterday, and it goes to what I'm about to say right now. It turns out that those touches, that sense of endangerment, let alone the quote-unquote nonviolent rape, which 30% of women in my culture, I don't know what the statistics are, in your culture, they're pretty much universal, at least at that level around the world. There is no such thing as nonviolent rape, neurobiologically, and I would even say there's no such thing as nonviolent harassment or even fear of sexual assault. Here's why. The new science show that rape stays in the body and rape stays in the mind unless it is dealt with in very, very targeted physiological ways. Some studies show that even 30 or 40 years after a quote-unquote nonviolent sexual assault, women with rape or sexual abuse histories have a lowered autonomic nervous system response compared to non-raped women, meaning that their heart rates, don't react the same way to exercise or to erotic videos, which means there's so many rape survivors who feel like, I've talked about this with my therapist, I'm in a safe relationship, why it's still a wall? And they don't understand it. Why is there still a physical wall? There's a physical wall because there's a physical wall. Their body response has been tampered with on this intimate, almost cellular level. Other women are reporting clusters of symptoms that doctors are only now beginning to recognize that seem not related to sexual abuse. Vertigo, meaning dizziness, balance problems, migraines, pardon me, all kinds of clusters, chronic fatigue syndromes, turn out that no one can really fix, no one understands them, they go from doctor to doctor, turn out to be clusters correlated with rape abuse or sexual abuse in their past, even years ago. And finally, this one was the most chilling to me, and it's a new finding I've included in the paperback. You can measure rape in a woman's saliva. There's a study that they did in Germany taking, pardon me, survivors of rape in war and survivors of torture that was not sexual in war. Same circumstances. The cortisol, stress chemical levels in the saliva of the raped women when they recounted their abuse were so much measurably higher than the women who had only been tortured non-sexually. And what I want to tell you is that why does rape have this effect on the mind and body that's so intense? And the researchers hypothesized, and this kind of chillingly made sense to me, that the reason there's this deep, intimate change in the body and brain is that the person you're mortally afraid of is so close to you in a rape. So close to you. Whereas they're not, there's still some human distance if they're only torturing you. Isn't that interesting? The person you're the most scared of is near you that intimately. So I guess what I want to say is, that the Indian women and men right now are having such a struggle getting legislators and police to get it about the violent nature of these crimes. And we're not any better. It's a 6% conviction rate for reported rapes in the United States. That's reported rapes. And Britain, no better, right? And we've got to change the frame around rape with these new findings. It is not a sex crime. It is a form of mutilation. It's a form of an assault that's so permanent and so damaging that it's measurable for years after. We've got to shift the discussion to the kind of lifelong damage that this does, so that these people get locked up, for years and years and years and years, because studies show that when rapists really go to jail, that's when you get change in rape behavior in a society. Now I will move back to, there's silence, I guess that's good. People are thinking. Now I'm going to move back to a happy thing, and I'm going to open it up for questions. In the Q&A, we should talk a little bit about how pornography desensitizes both men and women, but we don't have time for it now. I just want to say that even though I've talked about this sort of dark side of the brain-vagina connection, I feel, and by the way, when you understand that damage, you understand rape and war, you understand clitoridectomy, you understand infibulation, right? It's a form of trauma infliction. But turning it around positively, I feel like, I looked for a subculture where women were sexually self-respecting. It was very hard to find. The only subcultures I found where women were really, had a sense of feeling whole and happy were actually communities where there was a sense of the divine feminine, the goddess. And that means a different thing to different people. Weirdly enough, in the West, the issue I was most criticized for in the book was talking about the concept of the goddess. Very distressing to Western feminist critics for interesting reasons. But I can't help it. This is what I found. And I think that there's a very interesting reason for it. There are some cultures and some moments where female sexuality was seen as divine. One of the... So there are moments I drew on to look at that. And why is it so important? This is less true here, but in the West it's very true, and we can talk about ways in which it's true here. But in the West, what we inherit is this post-Christian division of the brain and the body, and especially the woman being assigned the role of the profane, right? The non-divine, the debasing, the anti-godly in her sexuality especially. And so if for 2 centuries you've been cast as the abyss of hell and Satan's temptation and the antithesis, the fallen, the Eve, the opposite of the divine, it's very, very healing to have an idea of thinking about your sexuality that is partaking in the divine. And so I guess what I want to say is, the goddess to me means that place. I'm not proselytizing, and I don't even think it has to be religious. But to me, it means that place of radical self-respect that inheres in every person, but that place of radical self-respect that inheres in every woman that tells her, if she's allowed to listen to that voice, this situation is dangerous to you, or this person does not honor you, or you need to honor yourself more, get out of this situation, right? Go treat yourself well. And that's so rare and so precious around the world, to create that environment for ourselves and our daughters. So I'll just end by saying I've seen so many examples in the short time I've been here of, you know, so many pioneers and leaders in this community creating that space for their daughters and challenging that notion of the feminine as that which can be debased, that which can be shunted aside or mocked or used or discarded. And it's really been inspiring for me. I know that women all over the world are trying to create that space of radical self-respect. So moving forward, I do think that reclaiming the vagina, you know, and our sexuality and saying, you know what, we won't be shamed about this anymore. We honor this. It's part of us. We create a world for our daughters in which there's honor in this precious part of our humanity. That's a gift that we give. We give it to ourselves, but more importantly, we give it to our daughters and our sons. And on that note, thank you so much for welcoming me to Chennai. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Are you aware of the play, how India considers, say, being celibate, whether it's man or woman, being in top political posts, right? So we are talking about women reaching their higher state or orgasm, as you call it. They tend to be more intelligent, or I don't know what is the context that you're saying. But in India, we have celibacy as a sort of a more primary. We have prime ministers who are not married, chief ministers who are not married, etc. So the celibacy.
No, excuse me, sir. What is your question? What is your question, please?
Is celibacy kind of?
Saying, okay, so let's keep it. So he's saying celibacy is celebrated here. How valid is it to talk about? So let me stress, what I talked about up here is not, I'm not imposing this on anyone. I'm just sharing information that I thought was important to me. And you can take it or leave it. If it's not relevant to you, you'll walk out of here and ignore it. And if it's relevant, you'll think about it. Thank you.
You were talking about your daughter and youngsters in India getting the same access to information. But if the girls are not allowed to exercise their rights after knowing about what is available, what is there for in their body and whatever you have talked about, if they are aware of it and not able to exercise their rights, then what is the use of that knowledge?
So these are very important questions. These are very important questions because, you know, again, every place is culturally specific and women face culturally specific barriers. So you're saying, like, let's be really concrete. A young woman leaves this audience with this information, and then what are the circumstances that she can't make use of this information, that she's not supposed to talk about it with her husband, or it's considered improper? Like, what are the boundaries? I'm ignorant, educate me.
She cannot even choose multiple partners. She cannot do anything sexually or otherwise. Because
she'll lose her reputation, because no one will marry her. Educate me more. What will happen to her if she does?
It's not in to be a non-virgin.
I see. Wow.
Yeah. I meant, yeah. That's
okay. Serious, like it, okay? All right, boy.
Here, a girl is supposed to remain a virgin till she gets married. Even if she has done something, she cannot discuss it or talk to even her own friends about it. And then there are still people, lots of people who remain in joint family. There's lack of privacy. Absolutely no privacy. Yeah, even after she gets married. And there are thin walls, and I mean, probably there's no time or relaxation or privacy to make love.
All right, so I'm going to restate what I just learned, and I know that it's not in every demographic, but it's important because it's coming up. It's very important. So a woman, a young woman, presumably in plenty of places and situations, can't find out that much about herself because she can't discuss it with her friends. She's supposed to be a virgin until she gets married. If she does have some sexual experience, she's certainly not supposed to have multiple partners. Okay, and if she does, she loses her reputation, no one will marry her. What are the penalties if she does? What happens? She's considered loose, and then what happens?
Nothing, I mean, nothing happens. It's you have to bear your consequences. You should be, yeah, you'd be look, she's that kind of a girl.
So it's like comments, and you lose status, you lose, okay.
Naomi?
Wait, I just want to process this before we go to a new thing, unless you're adding to this discussion.
Wait, sorry? Vasanthi has to ask a question. Please wait, she's been waiting.
Yeah, I just need to think about this for a minute. Do people agree with this line of, yeah. So it's what? It's a little cliche, but it's relevant enough. I'd really like to ask the students, but they look terrified. Does this, does this sound, I'm not talking about you or your friends, but is there a truth? Do you recognize what's coming up here, or things changed on campus? No, they haven't changed, she said behind the wall, shaking her head like this. All right, I'm not holding you to it. You didn't hear it from her. Okay, but this is a very big deal, because in a way it's like the West 25 years ago. My mother grew up in a world in which there was exactly this double standard. You had normal sexual desire, but you couldn't say it, you couldn't acknowledge it, you had to be a virgin when you were married. I mean, this is a very interesting moment. Again, I'm not here to tell anyone what to do. That is not my job. Having said that, I know that India is in a state of profound change. This situation will change whether I talk about this or not. I'm not saying, I really want to stress something. I don't think that Western sexual behavior is ideal. I think there's a lot that's terribly wrong with it. And actually, it was my last trip to India that led me to formulate my critique of what was wrong with a lot of Western feminism and Western sexual behavior, also traveling the Middle East. I don't think people are happy when they just hook up with everything in sight. I mean, I know from speaking to your counterparts in the United States that the way extreme that operates now, where everybody hooks up with people, which means has sexual activity without knowing them, ever seeing them again, with no thought for the future, with no sense of love or commitment, is not helpful. As a mother, I do think there is a healthy middle way, where our daughters and sons who are about to be, if they aren't already here in this country, bombarded with information from all over the world, right? No matter how many walls we put around them or how many expectations, they're going to grow up in a world in which you as parents cannot keep them from this wave of information flowing over them. So what can you do? And I think this about my own child. I can't protect her from the information. You can strengthen them from within. What does that look like? It may not look like they're going to make it to marriage as virgins. I think that is probably unrealistic, looking at the next 10 or 15 years ahead. It may not even be ideal. I certainly feel as a writer that an environment in which kids can't talk about things this important is not healthy. And I'm not saying this is culturally specific. There's silence all over the world. There's silence in the West. There's silence about incest and sexual abuse all over the West, right? So I do believe that at a university like this one, positive discussions with values and ethics and what is your responsibility, right, to yourself and someone else, is necessary. We also live in a world with diseases, okay? Global bad diseases. So these kids are at risk. I don't mean to gesture at you. Our children, the children of Chennai, right, the teenagers of Chennai and New York and Philadelphia, are at risk if we don't say, try to do this, but not that, right? Because intercourse is dangerous in many ways. And use a condom if you are in a situation in which that is about to happen. If we don't, I don't know what the AIDS transmission or STD transmission rates are in India. I haven't looked. I don't know what the teen pregnancy rates are. I haven't looked, but I do know, looking all over the world, silence doesn't protect our kids from these health dangers that derail their lives, right? So I do want to support that sex educator wherever she is. She said she had a lot of trouble getting into schools in Chennai. The more, I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry, I do believe the more responsible, detailed, ethical discussion with boys and girls about what's your future going to look like with these choices. What are the right choices for you? What are the questions you have, right? It helps them be mature. It helps them face the world that they're going to grow up in, whether we like it or not. So, thank you.
Naomi?
Naomi?
Yes.
We have 5 minutes, excuse me.
Oh dear. Okay,
we only have 5 minutes left.
Okay, but I want to take your question quickly, and then I want to be sure to get questions back here. Yes, sir.
Naomi, I just want to give you some information which you may not know about Vagina. Yeah?
Okay.
Yeah. One second. Yeah. One second. One second.
Okay,
yeah.
so quick.
Yeah.
Okay.
1 second. She is waiting. Why are you hurrying? Yeah? There is a book written by a foreigner which is available in Landmark. It has got 500 photographs of vagina with close-ups, and there is a text written about each character analyzed through the vagina from the Indian old ancient texts.
Okay.
And
yes.
Last
comment.
In 1850 or something, the Catholic Church used nuns for prostitution and built churches, and they were called as winter cheese.
Okay, I will bear that in mind. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah. My question is that, okay, time and again you've been emphasizing the fact that women should get to know about their bodies and all that, but should get to know about their bodies, yes. And I completely agree with you, but when I go back home, my mom is going to ask me, what sessions did you attend? If I'm going to tell her that I attended a talk on sex and sexuality, I can bet that her eyebrows are going to go up. And even now in this 21st century, I don't think parents are open about their children getting sexual education. Even today, it translates to being, something near to porn. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, I have to ask the organizers, because we were told we have to close at 5 of. Everybody's saying no, but you know what? I'm going to suggest mothers and daughters who want to share things with Naomi Wolf, please do so immediately after the session, because we have a responsibility for the rest of the program. Yes, yes. All right. At the book signing.
So she had an answer, and then we'll wrap it up. And then I'll answer your question. Yes. Yes.
It wasn't an answer, it's just that it is not as close as it came out today, because I'm here with my mom. And I know she wouldn't be open to the fact if I came and said I'm not a virgin. But at the same time, it's not closed. It is open to discussion. I can go to her if I have issues.
Right.
So, and we do talk. I'm sure all the students here, I'm a student myself, we do have talks about...
Okay, you do talk about it. So, she's an exception. So there are all kinds of mothers and fathers and all kinds of daughters.
No, this is not a comment as a mother.
And oh dear, they're saying we have to wrap it up. They really are. Yeah. Let's carry this on outside. Yes. To end, I just want to say some of us are blessed with the open, supportive mothers. Some of us are also blessed with mothers and fathers who may be more traditional, may have other expectations. I just want to end by saying, and I say this with love, the process you're in, I want to say this to the young women, there's going to be conflict in it, right? The fight for freedom and autonomy, it doesn't come easily. It involves some struggle and some difficult conversations and some eyebrows being raised, or even, fights or tears or, tough interactions. But there's a great beauty in it, because on the other side of it, your mom and dad may learn things that they need to know, and the people around you and the culture around you will grow with you, just like my culture has to grow when the young women and young men say, this world you've made isn't exactly what we need to change it. So that's the human journey. I just want to bless these young people for being here and bless them on their journey, and I have every faith that they'll have these difficult conversations and make the world one that reflects back their own integrity and their own sense of self. Thank you.